Welcome to the Black Podcast. I'm excited because it's Thursday, and on Thursday, we always have an opportunity to hear someone's story and be able to contribute to the community, the Black community, and spreading the knowledge and making those relevant connections. So I appreciate you guys sticking with us for the past year and some change. But before we get started, I need you to make sure that you're sharing this content, sharing this video, because again, in order for us to grow, as a community, it's important that we share and continue to share the knowledge to our people of influence, our surroundings, because you never know who's in your space that may need to hear the story of someone else. So please make sure you do your job and share the content. Also, make sure that you are keeping up with our social media as well as Facebook, Instagram, because we do have a company called We Are HSBA, and so you will see something going on our social media with the Black Podcast as well as we HSBA. So it is our company, is a big umbrella of our company, but please make sure that when you are sharing this content and you see anything from one of those two places, it is supporting the Black Podcast and the movement that we are on. So again, I thank you for supporting us and continuing to share the content. So please, right now, that's what I need you to do, because we have a guest on today that you do not want to miss. I'm just letting you know right now. I say that every week, but every week I haven't lied to y'all yet, right, Brian? We haven't lied yet. Every week has
Nah,
been
we keep only the realest.
yeah, only the realest. So I'm just excited again and so grateful to have my partner here, Mr. Street, and also having a support base that we have. And so thank y'all for that.
Yeah. How can I follow that? Now, you guys, you hear about us every single week. You know that we are sold out on pouring into that next generation, however we can do so. We have done so individually for years and collectively 20 plus years of experience working with those who we're pouring into. But at the same time, we realized we can't do it by ourselves. So we had to put together a platform so that we can network with other individuals to boldly leverage the affluent connections for knowledge. So we have gentlemen like our guest today that is going to pour into us, that's going to help us extend our platform to the things that he is doing and position us to be that village that is preparing our next generation for the next generation. Um, so I don't even have to say anything else about myself. We're going to go ahead and open up the mic, open up the curtains for our guest of the day. We have Dr. E.C. Dixon. How's it going?
What's going on, people? How are you all?
We're
Man,
great.
we
We're
are
doing
blessed to have
awesome.
you.
Happy Thursday evening.
Yes.
Everybody
And
can't
we
do
are
that.
off tomorrow, so I'm excited about that.
I'm jealous.
I told the kids goodbye. Enjoy your holidays. Don't send me no email. Um, but thank you so much for accepting the invite. You know, anytime that uh, we put it out there, and I was telling Brian when we first started about a year ago, over a year ago, it started out as something as an idea, right? So it was like, hey, Brian, let's do a podcast. Okay. You know, we talked about it for a little bit and then we came up with, the Black podcast and then what it meant, what the Black podcast meant. And so when I go out and find the guests, I really look for those that inspire not only the community, but myself. And so you're one of those people, Dr. Dixon, that I said, well, wow. I need to know more about him. I need to hear more about his story. And we know behind every glory is a story. And so we want to know more about you. We want to know about your journey. We want to know about your challenges, your strengths, your all that. We want to know about all that because we know our community needs to hear more of that. We tell our kids all the time, you're a product of your environment, but you can change what that looks like. And so telling your story really helps to change the narrative of our young Black males and females in education. So if you can tell us a little bit your background, starting from the very beginning of where you're from and the dynamics of your family and how you grew up.
Okay. Well, I'm Ernest Dixon. I am from a town called Augusta, Georgia. Many people might know that for James Brown. He's the famous former relative before he resident of Augusta. I grew up in a section of Augusta called the Bottom, so it's where low SES background individuals, hardworking individuals, lower class SES. And so I grew up around a lot of poverty or almost part at the poverty line. I was lucky enough to go to predominantly black schools. So with predominantly black schools, I had predominantly black teachers. And so really and truly what I believe was helpful to me in my ability to really transform my life and have better opportunities, more opportunities than my family had at that time is the black teachers pouring into me, seeing something that of great potential and really creating spaces and opportunities for me to grow and to learn and to challenge me and to ensure that I had what I needed to be prepared. The unfortunate thing was going to predominantly black schools and getting that care and nurturing. I wasn't necessarily prepared for transitioning to high school. So I went to public schools for elementary and middle school, had great teachers. They poured a lot into me, but I went to a high school in a not so low SES area where students from all over the county, Magna High School, they attended. It was health science and engineering school, and so I learned quickly that I had to do some catch up work because all of the educational opportunities I've been afforded, while great, were not at the level of some of my other counterparts in the same city. And so that really started my knowledge of the inequities of education, just seeing my own experience, like, oh my God, I'm so behind because I don't understand this math, like it's not clicking for me. I didn't have exposure to these things. And so that really, when I decided to go to college and to pursue an actual degree, it was in education because I wanted to really be want to prevent the same experiences for other students. I wanted to be able to be in a place where I create a learning experience that truly prepared students for I didn't know at that time, but prepared them for life. College and career is kind of the go-to term that we use now, but really and truly preparing kids to do what they wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do, and so that's what led me into education. And I started off as a special education teacher, and I've done some other work in some other areas, but truly, I know that the topic of today's discussion is special education, which is my first love. But really and truly, help supporting students that are not are marginalized in a different way, not just by ethnicity, race, or SES, but really disability wise. That's my first passion. That's how I started my educational career, and I've done some other things, but really and truly, that has been my bread and butter. I always leverage that experience with supporting students from the idea of having whole child responses in places where I lead, ensure that we understand students' background and we leverage that to really support students, ensure that they have what they need to be successful in school and receive the instruction that they need, but also to prepare them for post-secondary options, which has led me to be a principal of Queen City Academy Charter High School. When I learned of this opportunity, it was really me seeking something where I could really delve into my passion, give back to a community that looked like me, and to ensure that students had I was in a place where I was helping students really gain access to those things that will help them be independent and make choices for their own lives. And so this school is dual enrollment, STEM focused. It has a partnership with local colleges to ensure that students not only get a high school diploma, but can also obtain an associate's degree or college going credit. And so being able to do that work with people and ensure that students have a fair chance, a fair fight. We're really talking about students being prepared. That's kind of been my last few months here in New Jersey. But poor, low SES fought really hard. I have a strong village. What they lacked in resources, they made up for with love, and so that has been really my experience.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I thought my computer was muted. I really enjoy. So I had similar like an experience, of course, going to education. I've been in education for 16 years, and you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about where you started, and then kind of go into the special education, right? So, um, when you were in Augusta, and so you have, your education system there, and you're going through that, a lot of times, like I was even reading yesterday, how because of those areas that we're in, so if your school's in a predominantly area that's low income, Then schools are funded by the state, federal. So if your money's based off of, if your resources of the school is based on the area, if
Facts.
you
Yeah,
live in an area that's is lacking, financial stability, when you look at that type of resources you had like growing up, and then when you went on to engineering and it was like a whole nother, I mean, were you able to see the difference in like, okay,
absolutely.
what
Immediately,
happened?
I remember sitting in an algebra class, and it for kids, it just seemed so fluent. Like the concepts, that abstractness that comes with algebra, like they got it. And I'm like, we never talked about this. Like, I'm behind. Like this is what I wanted. Like I wanted to not go into the comprehensive high school. I wanted to do something a little more challenging, and to really um, grow a skill set. Um, but I just wasn't prepared. I'm like, this sucks. This really sucks. And so I had to work extra hard. I had to stay after school, had to go in early. I had to study really hard. Like it didn't come easy for me. Um, but I understood, in order for me to reach the potential, I did not want to perpetuate some of the cycles of my family. Great people, they didn't all make the choices I would have made as an adult. And so I just wanted a way to get out. And I know, in order to get out, like education was going to be that way for me. So I had to put a lot of effort, long nights, early mornings, to do the work that I need to do.
And I would agree. I remember when I was in, I think it was high school, middle school. I think it's more middle school, but I remember when the teachers used to always say, "Okay, we're going to do like a round robin." I think that's what we call it now, and
Yes.
everybody's going to read a section in the book or the paragraph, and that was always my perfect opportunity to dip up out of there, right? So I'm like, I ain't reading
Bathroom.
because
Right.
I read too slow. Half of these words I can't pronounce. I'm getting out of here. So I would go to the bathroom. I would go outside. I would find anywhere to go to skip my turn. And growing up, going through high school, and then when I got to college, I remember sitting in my first, I think, biology class, and the instructor was just like, "Okay, y'all should know all this stuff over here."
Right.
So, and I was like,
No, not quite.
either I wasn't paying attention or we didn't learn that, or I don't know. But um, back then, I felt like when I went to school, special education wasn't, that's not where you wanted to be, right? It was almost like if you were labeled with that, people would say you're mentally retarded, you're this, you're that,
Over
whatever.
time.
Right.
Absolutely.
So now it's more acceptable to say, "Hey, I don't understand. I need more assistance. I need more help." So it's not like a target on your back like it used to be. But back then I wouldn't dare to go tell somebody like I'm struggling with reading, because they would call you retarded, and so when people start using those kind of words as a community, we stay away from like, I don't need no help. Either you ask for help, or you just act like you didn't need help, but you really didn't learn nothing. And so when I got into education, I remember just always being very bothered, right, about when I saw special education in high school, because I felt like sometimes, from my experience, I would see that a lot of teachers, it was like a way of getting out of teaching, right? Oh, he's not, Johnny, you would have Johnny jumping around, you have Jermaine jumping around, right? And Johnny jumping around, it's just, he's very active, he's just being a boy, he's just very hyper. And then Jerome that's jumping around, you know, well, he got ADHD, he has, you
Right.
know, this learning disability, this. And so I started seeing the difference and I was like, why is it always like that?
And then the
Then,
tag onto that, and he needs to be somewhere else.
right, right. So this classroom doesn't fit for him, and so I would sit back and I would be like, why are they doing that? And so then I would see, kind of backtracking, when I was in high school, when I was running track, one of our fastest running backs at our school, um, they started putting him in, classes to kind of make sure that he's passing for football season, right? And so played the whole 4 years of football, and then when he got to college, realized that most of the classes he had took didn't really count for nothing. So now UIL was saying, "Hey, you got to go back and take this
remedial
course or
person.
that course or whatever. And so I'm saying all that and I'm kind of rambling all over, but 80% of our black males will be considered special education, right? Um, where can you give us more background on where did that start? Where it started to become more of a I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like it's more of a like an excuse to really push the students to really like being able to see the difference in does this student really need help, or is this student just doesn't understand and need more time, or how do we can you talk more about that space and why you became so passionate about that? Because I feel like a lot of times there is a division of what students really need help and then what students may not need that extra assistance, just may need just have a whatever
Well,
modifications.
it's just the systems. IDEA is based on all of the marginalizations of different groups. One being African Americans, one being African American boys. And if you have looked at the research in special education over the last decade or so, they've talked about the overrepresentation of African American males in special education. And so those are the reasons are many. One can be you talk about the resources of schools. We talk about students' experiences of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and you think about the preparation of teachers and their readiness to deal with students or to engage with and work with students who are different than them. So some of the biases that show up within within classrooms as you work with students that are different than you, African American boys in particular. But then you also think about eligibility criteria, and you think about some of the largest eligibility areas for students in general based on IDA. There's some very subjective criteria. When you think about the observations required for EBD or OHI, ADD falls under OHI oftentimes. And so I think it's an awareness that there's this overrepresentation of students with African American students with being found to be disabled. But then the next thing is where are they going once they've been labeled, and what are they getting when they're there? We think about the opportunity myth that we say we're giving students access to schools that they are all going to be prepared. And as you talk through the example of the athlete, that they're not all being prepared in the way that they need to be, and then they haven't, and then you get to college or their career, they don't feel like they have those skills, or they've been told they don't have the skills necessary to be successful. I think this is a conversation that has really picked up some steam after Obama did the requirement of IDEA equity in IDEA, where there was reporting structures, more standardized reporting structures added to state reporting data to receive those federal funds from IDEA. And so now states and school systems have to have conversations about where are our students, what's happening with them as it relates to their qualifications, why is that happening, have some very real conversations about the biases that potentially are taking place in causing students who are Black and brown to be qualified for special education at a higher rate than their white counterparts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times even a lot of the parents are the system is not always communicating clearly to the parents on what it means to be in special education classes. So I remember sitting in, what they call arts and stuff like that, and they would just tell the parent, it's just extra help. He's just getting extra help, and it's no big deal. And the parents just sign off on it. They just,
Right, because they
and in
trust.
my head, I'm like,
They
that
trust.
title is going to follow that child for the rest of his life. And so if it's not something he truly needs, like what are we doing? So can you speak more to that as well?
I think different cultures are very trusting of schools to do the job and to speak honestly about student needs. And I know specifically brown populations, the culture is that if the teacher says it, then it's got to be true, and that's going to be that. But I know there are systems that run on parents not being informed about their rights and what special education means and should mean for students. And so really and truly, it's parents being engaged and asking questions and holding systems accountable to providing those needs. And what I'm not going to say is that when a student is found eligible for special education that it's not needed. I know that it's not always needed, and I believe that if schools have better tier 1 supports and we really have real conversations about restorative practices as well as what does it mean to have better interventions and supports that prevent students from moving up the tiers of MTSS? You qualify less students because you had a better instructional program. And so those are very real conversations, and it gets very convoluted. But at the end of the day, it's like, what am I going to get that's going to be different from what I'm getting in the classroom, because now I have this label of special education, and you have to hold me to the same expectations. Even though I get specially designed instruction, I still need access to the general curriculum. So what does that look like for me, and not making these blanket decisions because like all EBD students are going to go down the hall and be in that small classroom with that one teacher all day. Like, those are injustices that happen quite frequently. For multiple reasons. One could be that there's not enough programming in school systems because of that funding piece. And people aren't making a fuss about it because it's quiet. And it's not happening to their children.
Absolutely. And I think it's important too for the students as well to know, what it means to be a part of that community that they're now going to be, a part of. Because I remember seeing students, one particular student, I said this story a while back, where he would be late to every day to class, and his teacher used to always come to me and say he's always late, and I'm tired of him being late, and blah blah blah. And so one day I just stood on the hallway just to kind of watch and see, like, what exactly is he doing. And it just kind of broke my heart, because while all the students were passing, he's dapping everybody up, and he's doing all this stuff. And then when the bell rung, everybody's running to class, and he would literally wait till everyone leave, and then he will walk backwards into his classroom. And I just said, oh my God, he knows he doesn't belong. He knows that something's really not wrong with him, that he just probably wasn't doing his work in whoever's class. And so he would do that every single day. And so I knew that, he just felt embarrassed, I'm sure, because here he is in this classroom where there are some students in there that really need assistance, and I know that he felt like he wasn't one of those students, because you could just kind of tell the way that he would, he'd rather be late and no one see him. Because even when the bell would ring, he would always ask, can he leave early? Or he would come out when the hallways are crowded so he could just kind of slide into the crowd, and they didn't know that he's coming out of that classroom. What do you do in those situations where, how do we do a better job at educating our students, our parents? Because I feel like it's important that they also are aware of their own struggles or learning, capabilities. Because I know for me, even when I went to get my doctorates, I knew that I can't study like everyone else. I
Right.
can't just read something and just write a paper on it. I have to highlight. I have to
Yes.
write a sticky note, a side note, an audio. But I knew those are the things that I had to do, and I knew that while I was in college. So I was able to study like that, all the way through college, all the way until I graduated my doctorate. But it was like I took it so serious when I did graduate, because for me it was like, this wasn't easy, but I knew that if I wanted to show what a student athlete looks like and what you are capable of doing, I had to be the example. So I did it. But I knew my struggles, and I wasn't embarrassed of my struggles. I knew, hey, I ain't gonna take me a week to study. Now I couldn't go out the night before and go
Right.
do stuff because I'm gonna get an F.
Right.
So how do we make our students and our parents more aware of that? And what is that? Have you ever had a conversation with a student that felt like I don't belong in that area? What was your conversation, or how did you handle that?
I think parents and students can't participate in this process in a passive way. They have to be meaningfully engaged. And so being honest and having conversations and having them be a part of the team and inform the team. I think it's so powerful to explain to a student his or her disability and what that means and how that impacts their learning, and let them process that information and let them give information back to you about what they experienced on the school day. Like, for you to take a moment to pause and say, what's going on with this kid that he's late every day? Some of the work that I did in Phoenix, it was based on behavior. Like, what is the why? What is the why here? Like, can we get to the root cause of these behaviors, and can we address that piece? Because so often we are looking at the superficial stuff and we're not getting to the heart of why a behavior exists, what it means, for what function it serves, but also what is a disability for a kid. Like, what does that experience look like for you to be now in this restrictive environment? And we often think about special education like it's over there. Special education is not a place. Is a service, and we have to treat it as such. And so parents need to be informed of what it means to give consent for their child to be placed in, to be evaluated and then placed if they found eligible into special education. And then what does that continual support and programming look like for the students? And it's the goal for always the student to be in their least restrictive environment and to potentially return to the general education class with no supports. But that doesn't mean that for all students. So having those very honest conversations and being very transparent and about students' progress and being able to come back frequently. We often talk about you come together for a year, you create an IEP, and that thing is there. But an IEP is a living document. It should be bring up what. And we have to hold schools accountable to going back when students aren't making that progress. Because if you calling me every day because my kid's not coming to class, like we got to do something different. Like
Right.
mission piece. Like, are we going to say that he can travel ahead of or after a certain changing period so that he doesn't have to deal with the embarrassment of having to be in that more restrictive setting? Like, can we sit down and talk through those things? And so being able to have those conversations and come together as teams more than once a year, if the student requires it, and make decisions and make changes to that student's program.
Yeah. In our community, even as adults, I mean, we're the black and brown community, in particular us, but we're taught to fake it till you make it. We're taught to um we're very prideful people, so a lot of times we're not asking for help. And so our students will act out in, like you said, behavior. With such and such, he is terrible. He got an attitude. It's like, well, that's probably his way of getting out of, instead of him saying he doesn't understand,
Right.
he gonna
Right.
act crazy in the classroom because he knows what you're gonna do. He knows you're gonna call the principal or you're gonna call somebody to tell him, can you go sit in the hallway or can you send him to the office? Well, that's where he wants to go because he doesn't understand your work anyways. And so he would rather be sitting with Dr. Dixon than
Right.
sit in
But we
Miss
have to push
Winkle's
back on
class
that
where he
rhetoric.
don't understand.
We have to push back on that rhetoric. If he has an attitude or he doesn't want to sit down, like let's get to the why. Let's not just say that. And then if it's a student with a disability, sometimes we have to have conversations with the adults to say, hey, this is what this means, and this is what your obligations are, and this is what the team is here to support. And so having very transparent and honest conversations and holding people to their piece of ensuring that the IEP is a living document and is being implemented with fidelity. And that's oftentimes an issue because some of our students, it's like, oh my God, he did something absurd, and now it's a manifestation determination because the behavior was so outrageous. We want to expel him or place him in the alternative school. But having that forces us to have a very honest conversation about, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing as a school? Is this really about the disability? Like having those real conversations. And IDEA is really written to support collaboration. And so we have to be collaborative in the process. And I think I know that we oftentimes in systems take advantage of parents just not knowing what their rights are.
Absolutely.
And
And
just
my last,
not being meaningfully engaged because they understand their personal experiences with schools. Like they made the decision. So they feel like this is another perpetuation of that cycle.
absolutely. And last thing for me, for you, what happened? Was there anything in your life or any experiences that made you like really passionate about special education? Was like what made you want to go into that field instead of all the other fields that you could have chosen? What was it about
So I
that?
did a summer. I was in college trying to figure it out because you never really know. At least I didn't know the first few years like what you want to do. I went to a summer camp and there was this activity where kids had to read something very basic, like a very low level, and the kids struggled. They started to display those behaviors like I don't want to do this. I need to go to the bathroom. Like I'm gonna act out so I don't have to do this. I'm like, what is the root to this? And then I pulled one kid to the side. I was like, what's going on with you? Because you don't normally act like this. He said, I honestly just struggle with reading, and this is not something I want to do. We had built that rapport, and I was like, okay. I figured, like, is this the same experience that other kids are having? But they're just, you just don't know all the behavior pieces because you're in college trying to learn. But for me, it was like somebody needs to really address this. And then it was like, well, maybe it should be you. You're trying to figure it out. You always wanted to be a principal because the principal seemed so cool. They had everything under control in the school, nice little suit or whatever. Like maybe you should try going down that road. And I had some educators in my family as well. We talked a little bit about it. And I just decided to start there, with the understanding that if this is not for me, then I will do something different. But I've been able to make a career of supporting students in public education.
Thank you for
A
that.
rewarding career, yeah.
Now, I want you to kind of stay in that area. Earlier, you mentioned a vast spectrum of individuals in need of special education. So not only those who may have you know intellectual disabilities, maybe other types of disabilities. So kind of speak to what you've seen, what your personal experience has been, and that setting with the students that may just have the basic needs compared to some of those with more extreme needs.
So really and truly, because it's tailored. It's like I will get your IEP. It will give me an overview of your disability, what your services are, what your needs are.
Can you just let us know what the IEP? Because some people aren't in education, so I know you and
I
I may.
know, right?
They're like, what is an IEP?
IEP is an individualized educational program. It gives an overview of a student's present level of performance, kind of where they are academically, behavior, socially, emotionally. It details what services and supports they require, accommodations, modifications, to what extent, what duration, and it gives guidance to teams about how to support that student and what goals that student has related to their disability. That's an IEP. I'm sorry, you get so. And parents should know that they should be able to do that as well. Like, hey, take a pause. Like, what does that mean? Like, break that down to me. Because educators get into that groove and they expect everybody to
We
be
start
at the same
speaking that
level.
education talk.
No.
We're like, we have no idea.
Education needs, no, calm that down. Tell me what that means. Absolutely. But really and truly, it's taking that IEP and really unpacking it and understanding like where a student needs to be and progress monitoring that student. So you ensure that they're getting the service that the IEP team determined is necessary. But then as an educator, as a teacher or case manager, you're progress monitoring. You're working with other teachers, ensuring that students are receiving those accommodations, modifications, but then you're all coming together and talking through like what is the impact of those things? Are they effective? Is the student continuing to struggle? Should we come back together as a team to make some other determinations about more restrictive placements, lesser restrictive placements, different services? And so really and truly, as I talked about the IEP being fluid, using it as a fluid document that guides how we support students with disabilities.
I love it. And I asked you that specifically because when I was living in Miami, I worked in child welfare. So I was a foster parent support specialist. So all of our foster parents, we talked about the IEPs. We talked about the various different things that a lot of these kids needed. And it would seem that it was so much more accepting and it was normal in their eyes if the child had a severe diagnosis that, okay, yes, they need this. But if it's a child that, may have a quote unquote very minor issue that they're dealing with, no, like we don't need to put him in special education. We'll just do this. We'll just do that. It's like it's more stigmatized.
Yes.
The less obvious the disability is.
Yes.
And what would you say to that type of parent who has that mindset? Let's say in the same household, and I've seen this before. One child would be on a severe level of autism, and then the other child, something very mild. Both of them need an IEP, but the parents like, no, we don't need both of them on an IEP because there's that added stigma. Okay, I got stigma over here. I don't want double stigma. So what would you say to that type of situation?
I think you have to have a very individualized conversation. Like, I'm not going to talk to you about your other kid. I'm going to talk to you about Jerome. Like, let's talk about what this means for Jerome. Like, these are the things that we've seen to be like a pattern of behavior, if you will, at school. And these are the protections that he has because he has an IEP. If you decide that you no longer want this, which is full and you're right, this is what this means in the event that these patterns of behaviors continue. And so just being very transparent about the process and kind of walking parents through that thought process. Like, if this happens again, like potentially he's going to be placed someplace else, or you got to find another school district for him to go to. So you got to just be very clear about that. So I always feel better when I'm able to have very clear conversation with parents, and sometimes I'm pulling them to the side, like, listen, let me just be earnest for a second. Your son has these needs, and it's not about a stigma. I understand that's big for you, and that's something that you have to unpack. But as an educator, I want to be able to tell you, like, this is why this is necessary, and this is what the goal is for this program. And so parents have to ultimately make their own decision. But for me, I can sleep better when I'm ensured that I have had those conversations. And then districts can always say, well, we attempted to provide this service. PWN, the give a prior written notice that they were ready, willing, and able to provide those services. So legally, if something happens, they have full right to say, well, we informed the parent of what we were attempting to do. They elected to deny services. And so now we're going to move down this road of expulsion or suspension or long-term suspension, or whatever it might be, whatever that consequence for a behavior, or students that failing. Like we had this IEP in place. We provided services because they needed more intensive services, but parent denied it. So they're now in general education classes and they're failing all of those classes. This is just another piece of documentation that says that we had a program we were really willing to implement, but the parent denied services. And so parents just need to be aware, like that's the game. Like those are the chess moves with those pieces. Just being very honest with people.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, and that's the whole culturally competent, component, because like how you mentioned earlier, and I actually let me make this full screen. I actually jotted it down in the taking the time to load. I jotted it down in the caption. You said that I was lucky enough to go to predominantly black schools, and I think that's such a blessing because there's a certain component of us that is fostered to whenever we are
Yes.
surrounded by and educated by those who know and can relate to the experiences that we go through. Whereas it's a little bit more difficult once you get to that school that's predominantly white or is very mixed, but the leadership cannot relate to your problems, your issues, the things that are traumatizing you when you come into the classroom. So, one thing that you mentioned is talking to them real. A lot of
Yeah.
times they don't know how to talk to us real.
Right.
So it's more difficult to get through to our young black men and women when you have no idea what the difficulties at home are. You don't know what conversations to have. And at the same time, you don't know what conversations to have, what questions to ask when you bring their parents in to have those conversations. So that's why I absolutely love to see someone like yourself in a leadership position. But then on the flip side, or, in addition to that, you being in a, talk a little bit about the charter school setting as opposed to the traditional public school setting, because I know depending on the setting, there's certain red tape, there's certain times where you have your hands tied, and on other occasions you can move a little bit more freely. So kind of speak to that and your ability to move freely in that space.
Right. And so this is my first experience in a charter setting, honestly. What drew me to this opportunity is the ability to do school differently and to be authentically who I am for kids that needed me to be authentic and not to create a show. Um, and that could be as simple as I look like them, like my hair is like yours, and I understand when you go onto your little lingo thing, like I'm following you as well. But we can have real conversations. I can say, brother, let's talk about it. Like you don't look well. Like being able to do that, and I think you can do that in public settings. I just think it doesn't happen as frequently as it can because there's this framework for which we have to operate, and I think people, when they have the opportunity to have some wiggle room, they can be more effective. And so that's kind of why charter schools are important, because it gives choice, but it gives choice to have school and kids engage in a different way. And so this has been an opportunity for me to do that, to bring the skill sets that I earned in those various traditional standard based settings, and just to be able to be here for my black and brown sons and daughters, and to be able to know that I'm gonna support here. I'm gonna give it to you real. We're gonna support you. We're gonna give you what you need to be successful, and we're gonna create voice for you. So it's not just about us giving you. Like you're gonna have an ability to give us back. Like, what do you need? Like, come and talk to me. Like I have kids coming on my door that, like, Dr. Dixon, I need to talk to you about something, and they're advocating, they have agency, and they feel free to do that. And you don't get that in other settings that are much larger. And so that, for me, that's one way that school is different for in the charter sector. Like, you can just do things differently, and there's less barriers between leadership and the student.
Yeah.
I love
And I
it.
feel like
I
the
love it.
education is more relevant and the kids really get it when it's a little more, the charter school, it's like,
Absolutely.
how can I relate the curriculum, what you need to know, but also where you understand it,
Right. And
in your
it means
space
something to you. Like, I was in a classroom last week, and the teacher was unpacking Frank Ocean's letter to a lover. Like, they were doing some personification poetry things. And so being able to, like, we're not doing Jack, I mean, was it Frost, whatever his name is? Like, we're doing different things. Like, we're bringing in people that are just as creative and important and more relevant to our students in our curriculum. So being able to do that, and not have the pushback that others are having. You hear this conversation about CRT and all those things, but we have very open conversations. We started our first week, it was really a social justice week. Like, because you're back from being at home for all that time. Tell me how you process all of those things. So building that community, we have a greater ability to do that in this setting.
I love that. And me and Brian, we have we'll talk about that with you on some of the projects and stuff that we have. Um, I don't, Brian, did you have anything else for Dr. Dixon?
Yeah. What time is it, man?
Because
Like,
I
I
was gonna
just
I
don't
was
want to
gonna
be.
ask him something just real quick. If you could
Yeah.
speak, if you
Let me
could,
jump in because I wanted to kind of stay in that same area.
okay,
Whereas he started out with his education predominantly black, I started out predominantly white, and I had no idea about HBCUs. I was in college before I knew anything about HBCUs. So in my environment, I got some good education coming up, but I didn't get relevant education, or I didn't notice or know that there was an ability to get relevant education until I was already in college. And I got to a point where, I was really wanting to develop a business, some type of social enterprise around who I am, specifically for my community. And when I was networking with individuals, oh, you went to a PW, Harry said PW, predominantly white institute, PWI. You went to a PWI. Why are you over here trying to? I just didn't know, and I think it's important to not to not demonize people because of where they were, because you only know what you know based off of what was placed before you. And one thing, how I really wanted to tie this in is, like, everything that I have gotten from my education so far, I am wanting to be able to go and teach at a HBCU. I'm wanting to be able to go and develop programs at a HBCU. And there was one thing a mentee of mine at the time stated, something along the lines of, these white folks can't give me nothing. And I'm like, man, while you're here getting this education, you take, let's say you're at their table, you take as many pieces of wood that you can,
Better.
because they are supposed to pour into you. You take what you want, what's going to be relative or relevant to your community, and let's go build a table over here. But
Yep.
don't cut them off, because there are certain pieces of access that you're getting through them. But
Hmm.
you just take that, let's repackage it and bring it to our community.
Absolutely. That was my experience going into education. First of all, the HBCU piece, I absolutely agree, but we have to change that narrative. We often talk about, like, you went to HBCU, but you went to a PWI. I went where I could go, like what I knew about. Like, I was going to leverage whatever I knew. So I went to the place that was 10 minutes from my house. That's where I went and started. And I'm leveraging my resources, what I know about. But I too agree. I wish I had gone to HBCU so I can participate in some of these what do you call them, homecomings that they have, bro. But with that, when I started my career in education, I was lucky enough. A white lady, the lady I did my student teaching with, she said that I have this principal. He reminds me of you, and he was the principal in a suburban area. So he was a black man working in a suburban area, and he was trying to find a brother that had the credentials and could navigate that space that he can bring on. And I was lucky enough that he chose me to take on a role and start as a special education teacher. And so to your point, you go and you find out what does it look like to be, and I don't want to say excellent, what the expectations are for a system. You learn that and you take it back to your community, and which is what I'm able to do now in all the different experiences I have. I took it back to Atlanta Public Schools. I brought it here. Like I want to be able to create an experience for my students that helps them prepare and be competitive with the understanding that this is different. Like you're navigating a lot more. We're going to respond to that, but I'm also going to prepare you for that. So I'm going to leverage what I know about this to help you get those things that you need to be successful, and so that you can navigate those spaces you need to, so that you can live out your dreams, whether it's career, college, whatever that might mean for you.
Wow. Wow. I want you to talk about this. I'm gonna kind of so when you have students, let's say you have this parent where this student obviously needs special education services, and the parent, I've been in some meetings where the parent's just like, no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. We're gonna pray about it. We're gonna let God. We're gonna get, they break out the Florida water, and it's like, this is not the time for that. In my head, I'm thinking this is not the
Yes.
time for that.
Yeah.
If you can speak to that as well, on the student that does need special education services, like he really needs it or she really needs it, and parents are like, mm-mm, we praying about it, we're gonna let God have it, we're gonna take it to the Lord, and that's what we're gonna do. I want you to talk to that parent, because you know that even in the Black community, even now, so that you know there was a time where people didn't want to go talk to a psychologist or a counselor because now you were labeled as crazy. So sometimes special education for those parents is like, nothing wrong with him.
Yeah. Yeah.
He just being lazy. He
Right.
just don't want to do the work. But this student really is having some struggles. So I want you to speak to that. And then I also want you to talk about, due to all the trauma, we talked about trauma earlier, with our students, as well as just all the things that's been going on, recently. I was telling somebody the other day that, we experienced a lot of trauma growing up, but nothing like what the kids are going through now. I
No.
mean, the things
No.
that they have seen and heard, I mean, it's crazy, right? So children who have like emotional or mental health problems due to trauma or whatever, um, and it's affecting their progress in school, do those students still qualify for special education services,
They
or is
could,
it separate?
they could potentially qualify for those services. They could potentially qualify for 504. But there's this process called SST, where you pull together everything you know about that kid. A team of people come together and talk about, like, this is what we're seeing. What are some tier 2 things that supports interventions we can put in place to support this kid? Who can he go talk to? Is it a counselor? Is it a social worker? So having those things in place, before we move to, okay, we're going to qualify him or her for special education. That's what I talked about, the tiers, like having very strong programming at tier 1 and tier 2, because you don't necessarily have to, for students that have those traumatic things, they don't have to be supported through an IEP. If you have this programming of social workers, behavior intervention specialists that can work on the general education side, those students can still be supported. So back to your initial question about what do you say about a parent that says they're going to pray it away and it's going to go away, going to trust in my God. You just say, okay, I'm not going to fight with you and your God, but what I'm going to say is that this is what a disability is, and this is how that works. If you elect for your child not to receive these services that we believe are necessary for him to be successful, that is your right. This is what it means. And so you have to be very honest about that. But in absence of an IEP, there's still things, if you have strong tier 2 supports in place, a social worker, interventionist, that just other alternatives in place at a school, and you're thinking creatively and outside of the box and not trying to just peg students over here because that's a safe place that's down the road. Being very clear about that, about what your programming options are, because what's going to happen is I'm going to deny services as a parent. You still have to do it with my kid until something happens potentially. And so what are we going to do to wrap some supports around this student? So it's important for us to have those discussions as teams. Like, we're not going to just let this kid, I know the parent made a decision and we don't necessarily agree with it, but we have to walk the next road. So what can we do in lieu of special education? And it doesn't always work. And sometimes you have to go petition other things and go through other processes that are more legal, because you believe a parent is denying students what they need educationally. There's a whole process for that. But really and truly thinking about what else can we offer this kid if they're not going to be supported through special education, because they're still our babies, they're still our kids. What can we do?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, I mean, for a long time, I knew that about the special services that were offered during public education or education K through 12. Um, but there's also a lot of um, services or support services for college, and I didn't know until I started getting into, I really was like, you know what, if I don't get an athletic director job for college or at a charter or have my own school, whatever we're going to do, I would love to work in student services, because I felt like it still was one of those things where you can keep it real with the students, you could provide them with, help, and I didn't know, like, even in college there are people there, I don't know if they call them IEPs either or whatever they call them, but what are the services in the like in the college level that our students can still have that parents need to know about? Because I think that a lot of times it's like, well, let's just get him on from high school. Once he graduates from high school, woo, we made it. And if he's lucky enough to carry a football or a basketball or a baton, then it's like, well, now you got a scholarship, woo. But it's like, this kid has probably been passed on for a
Yep.
very long time, and he's probably not prepared for college. And then, so that's one of the reasons why we have such a high dropout rate, because we just do enough to get them out of high school. And
Yeah.
then the next is like, if you get a scholarship, great. But nobody thinks about, okay, when he gets that scholarship, he does have to still maintain a certain GPA.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that they said in college, I believe it was at one of the HBCUs out here, they said that they do provide the services to the students, but the student
Have to.
has to come ask.
You have to
I was
self-disclose.
like, oh Lord.
Yes.
If you wait on a black student to go and ask for help in the special education or wherever, the chances of that happening is very slim.
But I believe you have to start building agency. Like, when this becomes, like, when a student starts in special education, you have to start having those conversations about this is what it means, and start building students' independence and ability to advocate for themselves and their needs, and to make that a part of the IEP. So it is. My sister actually works at a HBCU in the support services program, and so she talks oftentimes about that self-disclosure piece, and it's kind of your hands are tied, but teaching students that they have to advocate for themselves, and why they have to advocate for themselves, and what does it look like when they transition to high school. So that transition planning piece is also important. So even if I a student with special needs at high school, there's this transition piece of an IEP that helps me prepare for life after high school. And so one of those pieces, one of those activities should be like, start reaching out to those colleges and learning their process for students disclosing that they have a disability. What does that process of a review look like? Like, what documents do I have to provide for them? And so having conversations about that college planning piece as a piece of that transition plan is important. But really and truly, in order, because it becomes the student's responsibility to self-disclose. And so just building in some supports that really lead students to actually doing that, and knowing how to do that is important.
Absolutely.
Well, I I sit here and I listen to our conversation, and I don't know if you've done these before, but I visualize like just panel discussions with parents, with communities, because there's so much of what we're saying that you look at the dynamics of a household in an urban setting where that parent has to wake up at the crack of dawn to go to work, don't get home until it's about time for the child to go to bed. There's no real communication on what happened at school. There's no accountability for some of the students because of them not really having that type of parental, child to parent dynamic. There's no communication between the school and the parents. And ultimately, that child is pretty much trying to figure it out by him or herself. And that parent has no idea what he or she is experiencing in school. By the time it comes time to go to college or to graduate, and the parent is trying to figure out what this process is supposed to look like, they don't even know what the process has looked like. So that child is just lost. And there's conversations like this specifically with us that look like the parents, so they feel comfortable being like, you know what, man, like it's just hard out here, and I don't know what to ask, I don't know when to ask. So figuring out, okay, when is the best day, when is the best time, even if we got a quick 30-45 minutes to have an exchange. I'm not sure if you utilize Clubhouse or not, but I have found so much value in this type of dialogue on Clubhouse. But it's all about creating that community first, so that people know
Mhm.
that you exist. So I'm just here listening to this dialogue. I kind of remove myself for a second. Man, if only one of these parents, I'm one of these parents, if only I had access to this. And I'm thinking about a local high school that we have here. And I was standing in line at the store a couple of days ago. Gentleman behind me in line saw the lady behind him, and she had on a school shirt. It had the school emblem on it, and he was like, "You work at that school? That school is horrible." And she was like, "Well, I work at one of the sister branches of the school." "Well, I'm glad you don't work over there, because that school is horrible." And apparently he knows someone that works there, so he like feels like he can talk down on it because he's related to someone that works there. But it's predominantly black, and they don't have the resources. I was mentoring one of their high school kids about 5 years back. They don't have books. They have photocopies of the pages in the books. The
Mm.
resources are just not there. So that's one of the issues. But then at the same time, the parents just do not know what to do. And until you get them in front of information that you're able to disseminate, that myself, that Dr. Hobson are able to disseminate, we're going to continue to have a perpetuation of students that are labeled intellectually delayed, and they carry that throughout life. Oh, you didn't even get a GED, you're trying to get a job, we can't help you. So I just want to thank you for going into that area, going into that space. Another thing that you mentioned earlier at the very beginning, I took note on, was you made reference to the fact that you saw those inequities when you went from the predominantly black schools into the more suburban schools, and you went to college to say, you know what, I want to try and erase that. I don't want that to be an issue for the next generation. And it takes that. That's exactly what it takes. So many people will go to that next level in education and life and entrepreneurship, whatever it may be, for self-centered purposes, self-centered reasons. But when you're ultimately doing it to better the life of that next generation specifically, I don't know about you, but I feel like all the blessings and more are going to come your way, but you have to be real about it. So I just want to give you just give you kudos on that, and just mad respect, because we need more of it in our community.
Right.
Yes, we
Right.
do.
And that's part of the problem. Representation. It's not enough of
Mhm.
us.
Hmm.
It's not enough of us.
I remember
Yeah.
my first teaching job, and they put me in special education. They put me in, they call it BIC, behavior something. The kids that got the behavior or whatever. And so I was like, I'm going in and love on these kids, and when I got beat up by a kindergartner, I was like, I'm probably not going to ever do education, special education again. That boy stomped them. This is before they showed us how to restrain and all that kind of stuff. That boy stepped on my toe. By the time I bent over to touch my foot, he punched me in the stomach. I was like,
Wow.
okay, this special education is a lot. And it changed my whole perspective on, teachers that are working in that space, because it is not an easy job, at all, to make sure that you're trying to hold these kids up to a certain level, but also, accommodate them and make sure that they get the modifications that they need. And I mean, you think about the mental health and support of those teachers. I mean, how draining it be, for them at the end of the day of changing diapers, restraining, and still trying to teach them something.
Hmm.
you know,
Hmm.
um, so we have to make sure that, we definitely give respect to those teachers who are
Absolutely.
putting in that work because they definitely don't get paid enough
Right.
for what they're doing. If you can leave us with something, and also if you can let us know if you have any like books or anything people can find you for any services you provide or anything like that, if you can let us know at that time or
Okay.
this time.
What will I leave you with? I would leave with just building your village and leaning on your village, reaching out. I learned about this opportunity because someone reached out. So if there's someone that you believe has a skill set that you can leverage and gain more insight on, just feel free to inbox them on Instagram or LinkedIn to say, hey, I have a question. Would you be willing to sit down with me for 5 minutes so that I can thought partner with you? And I think for me, just seeing the engagement with you all, I was like, oh my goodness, there's other people out here that wants to have dialogue about something meaningful that I can add value to that. And so just being able and being willing to do that and getting beyond that pride factor to say, I don't know something, I'm going to leverage my resources to do that. So just being open to doing that, being vulnerable enough to do that and have very honest conversations. I'm working on an op-ed right now and a book, so I'm that's pending. As I near the end of that, I'll share that with you all. And hopefully you all can share that on your formats, various formats, and maybe
We
we
definitely will.
re-engage in
We definitely
re-engage in the
will because we're
conversation.
family now.
We are family. We are
So you're
family.
not a guest anymore, you're
Okay.
family.
I appreciate that. I'm building my village. I appreciate that so much. I appreciate you all creating space. I want you all to know how important that is as well. We don't have a lot of spaces where we have voices and we can have this type of dialogue. And so you all are really creating something that's needed and appreciated. And just thank you for that. Just thank you for giving me an opportunity to be a part of that.
Thank you so much. And we know that you haven't even touched the surface of what you're going to be doing. And so we're just excited that we're a part of your journey now and that we get to see all the great things that you're doing. And now that we're family, we'll be doing a lot of collaboration and partnerships and all the other things that comes with that. And so thank you for just being you. Thank you for continuing to press and grind and pay forward. And we are just so grateful and honored to have you now as family. And we just look forward to all your future endeavors. So thank you again.
Yes.
Thank you
Yep.
all
Yep.
so much.
Yep.
Thank you, family. I appreciate
Uh,
you all.
for sure. For sure. And just one more thing before we let you go. Whenever I saw your image, she shot your picture over to me. I was like, doctor. This dude straight out of high school. You talking about doctor? So it's beautiful to see that we have someone as
Nice.
youthful. So, or at least hey, black don't crack. That you see
Yeah.
It
someone
is what
that
it is.
looks as youthful because that's part of that bridge. When, like you said earlier, you look like them, you can vibe with them.
Mhm.
They
Right.
open up so much more.
Right.
They see me with these grays popping in. They might not
Brother,
open
right
up to
here.
me
I
as
can't wait to
much
get a haircut. I was like, I'm not gonna turn my camera on.
Yeah. You always
yeah,
like
man.
turn the camera on. But the
Yeah.
students
Yes,
did
but
every Friday. I always like to show off my shoes. So these are what I wore today. I wore some Nikes. So can you
Come
see them?
on. All right.
And so my kids was like, "Okay, I see you." I was like, "Yeah,
Mix it up a little bit.
I'm gonna
hey,
throw the blazer on
you
for
gotta
you."
keep it you gotta keep it
Okay.
comfortable.
All right. I ain't gonna
You gotta
well.
keep it
Why
comfortable.
everybody look at look? They're gonna be like, "What are they doing at the end of that show?" Keep it
Right. No, you
relevant.
wouldn't.
It got to be relevant. I mean,
You gotta
that
be relevant.
that's a conversation kids need to see because when you now you got that one kid that probably nobody else can reach and say, I'm feeling your shoes, and that's your
Right.
perfect opportunity to say, okay,
You got
cool.
the drip on.
Now pull your pants up. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Pull your pants up.
Exactly.
So, but
Exactly.
that is always a good conversation getter. When students do see you and say, okay, I see you.
I see you.
So we do appreciate your realness, and now we all done showed our shoes. We all gonna catch a cramp when we log off. I shouldn't even
You
lift
all
my
be
leg
well.
up like that.
You all
But
take care
thank
of
you so
yourself.
much.
Thank you so much.
And
God bless you.
We're going to put you in the backstage. We're going to close out very quickly, and then
Okay.
we'll dismiss you. So thank you again.
All right. Cool.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, I started something. I finished it. Right.
Yeah.
But anyways, it was such a blessing to have Dr. Dixon on. I think that there needs to be more conversations, obviously, about that space, because we have a guest that said something, and I can't read what it says. I pray that my son gets all the special education program. Absolutely. And I'm so grateful for him to be very transparent and speak on those issues, because our parents aren't educated. I mean, even as educators, we're not as educated on what we need to know about what it really means to be in that special education, and knowing the difference between, does my child need special education services, or does my child need mental health support? Knowing the difference in those two are so important. So I really hope that everyone that's looking at this podcast today shares this content, because it is serious. And in this time right now, with the amount of trauma that our students are dealing with, it is so important that we provide all the services that we can to our students, because they are dealing with a lot. Looking at the news, from trial after trial after trial, after black man after black man after black man passing away, all you see is shooting and killing. That stuff is trauma, and our students and our kids see those things. So please make sure that we're not just praying about it. And trust me, I know praying heals all things, but he also gives us resources and people in our lives to help provide those services for our students. So please make sure that you're not afraid to ask those questions to whoever is in your space in education. So I was very grateful for this conversation.
Oh yeah, man, my head hurting from laughing so hard now.
I know my leg hurts from listening to
Yeah, so
so
we we like to have fun here. It's very important, the things that we discuss, but you have to. Sometimes you got to take it with a grain of salt, and find the fun, find the good in every situation, because it makes you want to keep doing the work. If it was straight up serious 24/7, I'm gonna try something else. But you gotta love it. You gotta love the challenge. You gotta love the fact that there's those around you that love that challenge as well. So, off that note, that's the wrap for today. Another one in the books. Definitely was a great one, and we're gonna be back. We're gonna keep rolling, guys. We're gonna keep on rolling. Like, I don't know, we're just gonna keep on rolling because it's fun. It's educational, it's inspirational, and we just want to be able to continue to leverage all of this affluence to bring you guys the knowledge that you need to take yourself from where you are to where you want to be, but also to be that resource for those around you. So share, and we'll see you next time. Y'all have a good weekend.